It was December 2nd, 1899, in Luzon, the largest island of the Philippines. A small platoon of 60 soldiers serving the struggling Philippine Republic is holding a fortified uphill position in Mount Tirad's Pass. Their purpose is to act as a delaying rearguard against a pursuing U.S.-American force. They are protecting a retreating Emilio Aguinaldo, the president of the Philippine Republic. Aguinaldo was also a key political figure for domestic resistance against American military forces occupying much of the Philippines. The marching Americans number 600, outnumbering the Filipinos 10-1. At the head of the 60 Filipinos was one of the Republic's most decorated and daring commanders. Since 1896, this man had seen success against both Imperial Spanish and later American forces in previous military engagements. He had risen to become a brigadier general. He was an ardent revolutionary, Filipino nationalist, and one of President Aguinaldo's most trusted subordinates. His name was Gregorio del Pilar. He had just turned 24 years old the previous November. He was called Ang Batang General, the boy general. On this day, he would make a dramatic entry into his diary. The general has given me a platoon of available men and has ordered me to defend this pass. I am aware what a difficult task has been given to me. Nevertheless, I feel that this is the most glorious moment of my life. I am doing everything for my beloved country. There is no greater sacrifice. I have a terrible premonition that the enemy will vanquish me and my valiant men, but I die happy fighting for my beloved country." End quote. The battle that would follow would be known to some as the Philippine Thermopylae. Before we discuss this battle, we must cover the years that led up to it. Why had the Philippines thrown off the Spanish yoke? Why did the U.S. intervene and oppose full Philippine independence? How did Gregorio, a man scarcely out of childhood, rise to such prominence? What role did Gregorio del Pilar play in the conflicts that resisted these imperial juggernauts? Welcome to Historical Detour. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Consider pledging to my Patreon. For over 300 years, the Philippines had been a colonial possession within Spain's East Indies since 1565. The land was known as the Captaincy General of the Philippines. The Spanish language, Catholicism, architecture, etc. had firmly implanted themselves in much of Filipino culture. However, the heavy-handed rule by Spanish peninsulares created much discontent among native Filipinos. By the late 19th century, the oppressed yet burgeoning Filipino independence movements drew influence from American and French revolutionary ideals. The Filipino educated classes, or ilustrados, provided intellectual frameworks that envisioned a Philippines free of Spanish rule. The young Gregorio was born in a Philippines ruled by a distant Spain that still ruled a vast, though diminished, colonial empire. Though his family was nominally of the Principalia or traditional noble class of Spanish Filipinos, his immediate family's wealth was quite limited. However, several of his relatives were proponents of Filipino independence. His paternal uncle Marcelo wrote pro-Filipino newspapers critical of the Spanish regime. Another uncle, Toribio, was allegedly involved in the 1872 anti-Spanish Cavite mutiny. Toribio was sent into exile in Spanish Guam. Despite financial difficulties at the age of 15, Gregorio would be sent to receive an education in a private Jesuit-run academy. This academy was located in the colonial capital of Manila. Gregorio became fluent in Latin, Greek, Spanish, and French. He would live with a paternal aunt and her husband, Deodato Arellano. Arellano, with other Filipino nationalists, formed Katipunan in 1892, a revolutionary organization seeking the overthrow of Spanish colonial authorities. Gregorio would soon become involved in revolutionary activities against the Spanish while still a teenager. He would assist in distributing anti-Spanish pamphlets. Gregorio reportedly went so far as to at one point abscond with Spanish loyalist writings. He would remove their covers and sneakily put them over revolutionary writings before returning them, the authorities none the wiser. By 1896, Gregorio, entering his 20s, had earned his Bachelor of Arts and intended to pursue graduate studies to become an engineer. However, in late August, Spanish authorities had discovered the existence of Katipunan and its leaders. Katipunan had to launch their revolution earlier than intended. One of the Filipino leaders, Andres Bonifacio, and others are considered as formally beginning the Philippine Revolution in an event known as the Cry of Pugad Laon. Some claim Gregorio was present Victory for the rebel Filipinos would not go smoothly. Rebel sects fought in numerous areas against Spanish authorities. Gregorio would have his maiden battle in Bucolon province. As a young rebel officer, the Katipunan revolutionaries formed the Kakarong Republic. A Spanish pacification force arrived at one of the fledgling republic's fortresses on January 1, 1897. Though initially putting up a stiff resistance, Gregorio and a small band of men had to retreat. The Spanish forces killed many they captured and burned the rebel townships and villages. Gregorio wrote, quote, "As for me, I need not say how I fought. Those who saw me in peril can tell. A Mauser bullet grazed my forehead. Thank God I was spared that danger. Finally, I had to leave the fort because when I looked for our valiant brothers, none was any longer at his post. This should not cause shame. Self-preservation is the law of God," end quote. Gregorio soon after would become a successful guerrilla fighter for months. Eventually, he was elevated to the rank of captain. He earned the loyalty of many he commanded. His most famous feat against the Spanish would be his daring raid of Payambong. His guerrillas, several disguised in civilian clothing, attacked Spanish soldiers attending a Catholic Mass. They reportedly killed nearly 100 Spanish soldiers, forcing them into retreat while the guerrillas stole armaments. One of the key Filipino leaders, Emilio Aguinaldo, took notice and ensured the talented Gregorio was promoted to lieutenant colonel. This began a mutually beneficial relationship. Gregorio soon had a personal flag made to denote his presence on the battlefield. It was a flag of red, blue, and black. His personal force was known as Brigada del Pilar. While Gregorio saw success throughout the year of 1897, the wider Katipunan movement was fracturing. Bonifacio and Aguinaldo continually feuded over leadership, which led to a split within the rebels. Eventually, Aguinaldo had Bonifacio and his brother captured and executed in a sham trial. The war between the Filipinos and Spanish was in a costly stalemate for both sides. By mid-December 1897, the Pact of Biak-no-Bato was made. It was a truce between Aguinaldo's revolutionary government and the Spanish Governor-General. Aguinaldo and other senior Filipino officials would go into exile in British Hong Kong. The Spanish would meanwhile provide finances to support their exile. This truce would be very temporary, however. Rather than viewing the pact as a time to lay down arms, Aguinaldo soon procured further arms and supplies for a future return to his home country. Gregorio accompanied Aguinaldo to Hong Kong, and a deep friendship blossomed. Aguinaldo, during this period, would state of Gregorio that, quote, "I took him to Hong Kong, Saigon, and Singapore. He was my man of confidence. I could trust him with anything," end quote. April 1898 proved a critical turning point for the Philippine independence movement. The U.S. declared war with Spain due to rising tensions between the two powers. The war between the U.S. and Spain would be known as the Spanish-American War. While the most famously remembered aspect of this war in American textbooks is Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders in Cuba, the military theater in the Philippines was equally important. Galvanized after meeting with American officials, Aguinaldo and Gregorio returned to the Philippines for a final campaign against the Spanish. On May 1, 1898, American Admiral George Dewey's Asiatic Squadron scored a spectacular naval victory in Manila Bay in the Philippines. Gregorio was assigned to participate in the campaign to capture the province of Bucolon. He eventually did so by June 1898. Additionally, he was appointed the governor of Bucolon by revolutionary decree and soon captured the city of Caloocan. Gregorio soon hosted a parade that celebrated the establishment of the Revolutionary Congress. He was additionally made a brigadier general, a rank he would hold to the end of his life. Though the Spanish relinquished control of the Philippines by 1899, the Filipino Republic under Aguinaldo found a new foe. The United States were initially allies to revolutionary Filipinos. However, the Spanish never recognized any revolutionary government and instead sold the Philippines to the U.S. Once the Spanish-American War had concluded, the Spanish went so far as to have a mock battle with American forces before handing much of the capital Manila to the U.S., rather than let Aguinaldo's revolutionaries take possession of the city. Though Manila was essentially held by the U.S., Aguinaldo's revolutionary army surrounded it. This made for a most awkward and delicate peace entering into 1899. U.S. President William McKinley made clear that not only would U.S. forces not leave the capital, but, quote, there must be no joint occupation with the insurgents. The United States, in the possession of Manila City, Manila Bay, and Harbor, must preserve the peace and protect persons and property within the territory. The insurgents and all others must recognize the military occupation and authority of the United States. The U.S. soon sought to make the Philippines as a whole a protectorate governed by U.S. officials. The American government did not trust the Filipinos or Aguinaldo to maintain independence. The U.S. government also feared the expansion of Imperial Japan, who had already seized Taiwan from the Qing Empire during the First Sino-Japanese War. Possession of the Philippines would strengthen American trade and naval influence in the Pacific. The U.S. would not recognize the Filipino government of Aguinaldo or any other. Eventually, fighting would break out between the Filipino Republican Army and the U.S. occupiers in February. An initial small skirmish between patrolling Nebraska volunteers and Filipino army men escalated into the largest and opening battle of the conflict, the Battle of Manila. The U.S. would ultimately prevail in this battle. Gregorio would ultimately play a largely subordinate role to the Chief General of the Philippine Republic, Antonio Luna. Gregorio, however, was perceived as a hot-headed, arrogant, and an Aguinaldo lackey by other Filipino officers. The Republican Army struggled against American forces, consistently retreating and losing territory. At the Battle of Quingua on April 23rd, del Pilar's personal forces initially repelled a frontal assault by the 4th U.S. Cavalry. De Pilar was aided by their entrenched position. Reinforcing U.S. units eventually closed in for close-quarters fighting with Pilar's men, forcing a Filipino retreat. However, the American victory was rather Pyrrhic, with several American dead and wounded. Among the fallen was Colonel John Stotzenberg, making him one of the highest-ranking American combat casualties of the entire conflict. A mere 2 days later, on the 25th of April, Pilar and his men would participate in the Battle of Calumpit. Gregorio was nominally under Luna's command. Luna and Gregorio were defending Malolos, the capital of the Philippine Republic. However, Luna would abandon his position to punish an insubordinate general. Luna took with him much-needed cavalry and artillery. This ironically gravely weakened the Filipino battle line. Pilar, now one of the chief generals of the defense, attempted to sabotage railway crossings on a river with the intent of collapsing an American supply train. Unfortunately, this merely delayed its crossing. Due to botched timing, the American forces managed to outflank and overrun many segments of the Filipino defensive positions. By the time Luna returned, there was little that could be done except retreat by the second day of battle. Though the Republic claimed hundreds of Americans were killed in this confrontation, only 22 American soldiers are reported dead. In more reliable American reports, albeit more than 100 were wounded. Republican losses are estimated to be in the hundreds, however. The Philippine-American War was not merely a conflict between Aguinaldo's Republic and American forces. The Philippine Republic, despite its name, did not represent all Filipino resistance and independence movements within the country. Aguinaldo openly sought a government ultimately underneath his control and influence. Aguinaldo would crack down harshly on any who would oppose or even criticize him. This included fellow proponents of Filipino independence. It has been argued by some scholars that Aguinaldo ordered the execution of his star general Antonio Luna, due to various disagreements, a charge that Aguinaldo denied in life. One former officer claimed that Aguinaldo had given verbal instruction to have Luna assassinated. A telegram reportedly sent by Aguinaldo to Luna orders him back to base. However, Aguinaldo was absent when Luna arrived. Instead, Luna was shot and stabbed by rival officers at their headquarters in Bayambang. Gregorio, contrary to his romantic image as a dashing dandy, was a staunch and even fanatical Aguinaldo partisan. Gregorio would commit heinous actions on his benefactor's behalf by the late 1890s. Acting as a hatchet man for Aguinaldo, Gregorio and his men would participate in the torture and murders of some of Luna's command staff, shortly after Luna's fall. For most of the latter half of 1899, Gregorio was required to quell unrest after Luna's murder in Pangasinan province. During these months, Gregorio was involved in several romantic relationships with various women simultaneously. Mounting military defeats, the death of General Luna, opposition to other independence factions, and American consolidation of captured territory irreparably harmed the Republican cause. Aguinaldo and members of his government soon fled their capital of Malolos by November 1899. By November 1899, Aguinaldo disbanded the regular national army in favor of employing guerrilla tactics in a gamble to defeat the Americans in a war of attrition. Gregorio and his Brigada del Pilar would accompany Aguinaldo on his northern retreat on the island of Luzon in November. Pilar's men acted as bodyguards and escort for this small party. Once it was realized that a rearguard action would be necessary to prevent Aguinaldo and other important Filipino leaders from being captured by American forces, Pilar ordered the digging of trenches and construction of stone fortifications in the pass of Mount Tirad. They commanded the steep slopes for an ideal killing field. Gregorio elected to fight alongside his men. In command of the 600 pursuing American soldiers was Major Peyton C. March. This battle would be a smaller scale Thermopylae. Gregorio and his platoon stood in for the Greeks. Ironically, the Americans took on the role of the overwhelming Persians. The first shots rang out on the morning of December 2nd. The Americans barely made any headway in the morning hours. The entrenched Filipino defenders caused American progress to slow to a snail's pace. Some Americans from Texas managed to find a hill for a better line of fire, but even this was not enough to overwhelm Pilar and his men. Eventually, a local man, Gregorio Galot, was found, and he agreed to lead some of the Americans on a path that would allow them to outflank Pilar in the rear. In the meantime, 2 Americans had perished while several had been wounded. Soon the final American assault began. This was after over 5 hours of exchanging gunfire. Now overwhelmed with an attack in front and behind, all but 8 of the 60 Filipinos would die in the fight. Gregorio was apparently killed with a shot to the neck. Gregorio's body, when found, was reported to have had the handkerchief of one of his girlfriends and a lock of hair from another. Gregorio and his men's sacrifice did ensure Aguinaldo would escape. Although Aguinaldo would eventually be captured in 1901, Gregorio, despite a short life, remains one of the most popular figures in Filipino history. Many American newspapers and servicemen gained a grudging respect for the dauntless Gregorio as well, however. Ignored in these nationalistic or simple hagiographies are both Gregorio's controversial killings of Luna's lieutenants, while Aguinaldo's ruthless purges of political opponents are ignored. From student to general in a matter of a few years, the boy general led a most fascinating life.